We live in a world that constantly tells women to be open, transparent, and vulnerable in order to form meaningful connections. And while honesty is a beautiful thing, there's a critical difference between being open and being exposed. The truth is, not every piece of your heart, history, or mind is meant to be shared, especially not early on, and especially not with every man you date or get close to. There's power in privacy. There's strength in holding back certain parts of yourself, not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting something sacred, your worth, your mystery, your emotional well-being. When you give away too much too soon, you can lose the very thing that makes a man want to know more: curiosity. So in this message, we're diving into 5 things women should always keep private. 5 things that, if shared too early or with the wrong man, can be misunderstood, misused, or even lead to unnecessary heartbreak. This isn't about playing games. It's about knowing your value and recognizing that not every detail of your life belongs in someone else's hands. Ready? Let's begin. When a woman enters a relationship, there's often this unspoken pressure to lay everything on the table, to prove that she's genuine, that she has nothing to hide, that she's emotionally available. But here's the thing. There is immense power in not revealing everything about yourself all at once. Mystery builds value. When you allow someone to slowly discover who you are, to peel back your layers over time, you not only create more attraction, you establish boundaries. And those boundaries are what separate a high-value woman from someone who's just desperate to be chosen. There's a difference between being authentic and being an open book. Authenticity means showing up as your true self, but it doesn't mean giving away every detail of your life to someone who hasn't earned that level of access. You can be honest without being transparent about everything. In fact, the most confident, self-assured women are often the ones who know how to say, "That's something I prefer to keep to myself for now." And those words, spoken calmly and without apology, are incredibly powerful. Many women fear that if they don't share enough, the man will lose interest. But it's actually the opposite. When everything is laid bare too soon, your past heartbreaks, your deepest insecurities, the things you haven't even fully processed yourself, you stop being a mystery. You become someone who's looking for emotional relief instead of connection. Men may listen, but they're not building deeper attraction. They're gathering data, and sometimes that data is used to make judgments or assumptions that don't serve you. Think about how magnetic it is when someone keeps you guessing just a little bit. When you're not sure what their story is, and you're intrigued to know more. That energy, that pull, is what makes early dating exciting. It's not about withholding for manipulation's sake. It's about pacing the connection in a way that aligns with your sense of value. A woman who knows that not everything must be shared right away is a woman who understands that her story is precious, and not everyone deserves the full version on day one. Let's be real. Most men don't lead with emotional vulnerability. They don't open up about their past wounds, their relationship fears, or the things that keep them up at night. Not right away. They hold that close. They observe, They decide if you're someone who can be trusted with that level of intimacy. So why should women feel pressured to offer up their entire emotional resume to someone they've just met? Why should you feel obligated to explain every failed relationship, every mistake, every family dynamic to a man who hasn't even proven that he's emotionally safe? You don't need to justify who you are by oversharing. You don't owe anyone an explanation about the things you're still healing from. You're allowed to keep some things private, not because you're hiding, but because you're discerning. Because you know that real intimacy isn't built on information. It's built on trust and time. And here's another truth. When you're selective about what you share, you give men the opportunity to earn deeper access to your world. You invite them to invest. You allow them to pursue not just your time and attention, but your emotional truth. And that pursuit is what builds respect. A man who feels he has to earn your trust will value it far more than a man who receives it instantly without having to do anything. If you want a relationship where you are cherished, seen, and deeply respected, you can't start from a place of emotional when you leave a little mystery, when you hold certain things back until the connection has real roots. You protect your peace. You filter out the ones who are only curious, who want the thrill of knowing your secrets without the commitment to your heart. And you attract those who are patient enough to get to know you the right way, slowly, sincerely, and respectfully. So never feel guilty for keeping certain parts of yourself private. The woman who reveals her heart with intention, not impulse, is the one who commands the highest level of connection. Not because she's playing hard to get, but because she knows her story is worth more than casual conversation. She is worth more. And anyone who gets to know her should be grateful for every piece she chooses to share. Because each one is a gift, not a given. When a woman opens up about her life, especially early in a connection, she often does it with the best intentions. She wants to show vulnerability, create emotional depth, and demonstrate that she's real. But what she may not realize is that not every man interprets vulnerability the way she does. What feels like openness to her can sometimes come across as neediness, insecurity, or emotional burden to him. That's not because men are cold or uncaring. It's because they often process emotional information differently, especially in the early stages of a relationship. Oversharing can sabotage a connection before it even has a chance to grow. When you give someone too much of your emotional world too soon, you run the risk of overwhelming them. It's like handing someone a novel when they've only just agreed to read the back cover. There's a rhythm to revealing yourself. And when that rhythm is ignored, the connection becomes lopsided. One person feels emotionally full while the other feels emotionally responsible. And that imbalance can create confusion or even push them away. Some women share personal details early on because they believe it will create instant intimacy. They talk about their past heartbreaks, toxic exes, childhood wounds, or the struggles they're currently facing. And while this may foster a temporary sense of closeness, it can also lead a man to make premature assumptions about who she is. He might start seeing her through the lens of her pain rather than the lens of her potential. What was meant to build understanding can quickly become a reason for him to hesitate, back off, or even label her as too much. This doesn't mean you should hide who you are or pretend your life is perfect. It means you should protect the sacred parts of your journey and only share them with someone who's shown consistent care and curiosity. There's a difference between being real and being raw. Being real means you're grounded, self-aware, and confident in your truth. Being raw means you're offering your deepest wounds without knowing how they'll be received, or whether the other person is equipped to hold them with respect. When a woman overshares, it often stems from a desire to fast-track emotional closeness. But real intimacy isn't built in a rush. It's layered, gradual, and earned. It comes from mutual trust, not from dumping all your truths on someone and hoping they stick around. You have to ask yourself, is this person truly in a position to receive what I'm sharing, or am I just trying to prove that I'm emotionally available? It's also important to remember that some men may not tell you they're overwhelmed. They'll listen, nod, even empathize, but internally they're registering red flags. Not because you're broken or unworthy, but because the pace of emotional sharing doesn't match the stage of the relationship. And when a man feels emotionally responsible too soon, especially before trust and connection are firmly established, he might pull away without ever explaining why. This is why emotional pacing matters. Just as you wouldn't expect someone to invest their finances into something they don't fully understand, you shouldn't expect emotional investment from someone who hasn't had the chance to truly get to know you. Sharing your life story too quickly denies the relationship the space it needs to grow naturally. It replaces curiosity with obligation, and that can cause even the most well-meaning man to feel cornered. Instead, let your story unfold over time. Let each layer come out when it's relevant, not just because you're craving emotional validation. You can talk about your past without diving into every painful detail. You can be honest about your growth without giving a full inventory of your struggles. Let him earn the right to hear your deeper truths, not because you're hiding, but because you value yourself enough to share with intention. What you protect, you preserve. And when you preserve your emotional world, you give a man the opportunity to respect it. He doesn't just hear your pain, he feels honored to be trusted with it. But that level of respect can only exist if you give him the time and space to build it with you. When you overshare, you rob him of that opportunity. You flood the connection instead of feeding it slowly. So if you want to be understood, don't rush to be fully known. Let your emotional truth be something that's gradually uncovered, not urgently declared. Because when you share with patience, clarity, and discernment, you give your story the dignity it deserves, and you give your relationship the chance to thrive. There's a quiet kind of power in the woman who doesn't feel the need to explain herself. She moves through relationships with a sense of internal stability, not because she's closed off, but because she understands the difference between being emotionally available and being emotionally dependent. She doesn't rely on others to validate her story or to carry the weight of her emotions. This kind of woman knows that self-respect begins with self-containment. The ability to manage, understand, and protect your inner world before inviting someone else into it. In dating, there's often a temptation to lead with vulnerability as a way to fast-track trust, but not all vulnerability is healthy. Some of it is premature. Some of it is offered before the other person has earned that level of access. And when that happens, it's not vulnerability, it's a lack of boundaries disguised as emotional openness. A woman who knows herself doesn't offer up every detail of her past to prove she's honest. She doesn't use oversharing as a way to feel closer. She lets closeness build through presence, through consistency, and through shared experiences, not just through storytelling. Self-containment means you can sit with your emotions without needing someone else to fix them. It means you can feel hurt, frustrated, or even insecure and still hold space for those feelings without immediately offloading them onto someone else. This isn't about being emotionally unavailable. It's about emotional maturity. It's about being able to say, I'm working through something right now, instead of trying to make someone else responsible for your emotional regulation. When a woman maintains that kind of emotional self-possession, it becomes clear to the people around her that her value isn't based on their reaction. She doesn't share to be liked. She doesn't reveal intimate parts of herself to win someone's empathy or affection. She shares because it's aligned with her timing, her standards, and her sense of safety. And when a man sees that, it shifts the dynamic entirely. He recognizes that if he wants access to her deeper self, he has to show up with more than charm. He has to show up with consistency, with respect, with patience. The truth is, many people, men and women alike, haven't mastered the art of emotional self-containment. They mistake connection for codependency. They confuse emotional honesty with emotional spilling. But real connection doesn't come from making someone your therapist or expecting them to heal wounds they didn't cause. It comes from two emotionally whole people choosing to grow together, not complete each other. Self-respect in this context isn't about pride or ego. It's about knowing that your emotional world is not a public forum. Not everyone deserves access to your fears, your dreams, your private doubts. When you give that access too freely, you send the message that your emotional energy is up for grabs. And over time, that depletes your sense of worth. But when you contain yourself, not repress, but contain, you protect your power. You keep your center grounded. You remain in control of your narrative. Men are deeply drawn to women who radiate this quiet self-respect. There's something undeniably attractive about someone who doesn't need to overshare to feel seen. A woman who's grounded in herself becomes less reactive, more magnetic. She's not trying to force a connection. She's letting it unfold. And in doing so, she sends a clear message. I am the prize. I am the one you earn. That's not arrogance, that's alignment. That's self-respect in action. When you're in a relationship, even a promising one, not every thought or feeling needs to be verbalized. Not every moment of doubt needs to be discussed. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is to sit with it, reflect, and decide what's worth sharing and what's worth processing privately. Because the truth is, when you trust yourself to handle your own emotions, you become less attached to how someone else responds. You're no longer seeking reassurance, you're offering clarity. And from that place, your connections evolve. You stop chasing love and start attracting it. You stop performing emotional intimacy and start experiencing the real thing. Because only when you respect yourself enough to contain what's sacred can you invite someone in without fear of losing yourself in the process. So if you've ever felt like you had to spill everything just to feel seen, take a step back. Breathe. Remember who you are. Your worth is not measured by how much you share. It's measured by how well you protect what matters. Self-respect begins with self-containment. And when you master that, you become someone who is not only desirable, but unforgettable. In the early stages of a relationship, it's natural to want to build connection. You want to feel closer. You want to understand the other person, and you want them to understand the other person, and you want them to understand you. But not everything that's personal creates intimacy. In fact, some things, when shared too early or too freely, can do the opposite. They can dilute the connection rather than deepen it. The truth is, real intimacy isn't built by flooding someone with your entire life story. It's built through mutual curiosity, emotional safety, and time. There's a common mistake people make, especially women who are emotionally intelligent and self-awareness. They believe that by being completely open, they'll be seen as authentic, trustworthy, or different from others. So they reveal everything: the heartbreaks, the childhood trauma, the family drama, their fears, their regrets. And while those things are a part of who they are, sharing them too soon, before there's any real foundation, doesn't always lead to closeness. Sometimes it just overwhelms the other person or sets the wrong emotional tone. It's important to remember that emotional depth isn't about volume, it's about timing. Some stories are meant to be shared after trust has been established, not as a shortcut to create it. Because without trust, vulnerability can feel like pressure. When a man is still figuring out who you are, he's not yet equipped to carry the weight of your emotional history. And if he hears too much too soon, he may begin to see you through the lens of your pain, not the strength you've built from it. Not everything you reveal creates a deeper bond. Sometimes it creates emotional confusion. A man might listen out of politeness, but inside he may be thinking, why is she telling me this right now? That confusion doesn't necessarily make him a bad person. It just means the emotional pacing is off. You might be offering depth before he's ready, before he even knows how he feels about you, or before he's shown you he can hold space for your truth with maturity and care. Every relationship needs a filter. Not a wall, but a filter. That filter is what allows you to decide what deserves to be shared and when. It's not about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about giving your story the dignity it deserves by offering it to someone who's truly listening, truly invested, and truly worthy. If you find yourself constantly wanting to prove your honesty or your emotional depth, it might be a sign that you're trying to earn intimacy rather than allow it to unfold naturally. When you hold certain things back, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself and the pace of the relationship, you actually strengthen your position. You create space for the other person to be curious about you, to ask questions, to pursue you emotionally. That space is powerful. It gives both people room to breathe, to observe, to grow together. And it prevents the kind of premature emotional bonding that often leads to attachment without true compatibility. There's a big difference between connection and emotional dumping. Real connection happens when both people feel safe, when both are choosing to share, not out of impulse, but from a place of intentionality. When you share everything too quickly, you risk forming a false sense of closeness, one based on shared secrets rather than shared values, shared experiences, or shared goals. And here's something many women overlook. A man who is emotionally healthy will appreciate your discretion. He will respect that you take your time. He will understand that your silence isn't distance, it's discernment. He'll sense that you're not trying to impress him with your pain, and that's attractive. It shows that you don't need his validation, that you've already done the inner work, and now you're simply inviting someone into your world, slowly, wisely, and with grace. When you treat your personal stories as sacred, you teach others how to treat them too. You communicate without saying a word that your emotional truth is valuable, that it's not entertainment, that it's not a shortcut to intimacy. It's a privilege. And only someone who's truly showing up with consistency, presence, and genuine care should be allowed to hear it all. So take your time. Don't confuse vulnerability with urgency. Don't assume that the more you share, the more someone will feel connected to you. Some things are best kept private. Not forever, but until the relationship is strong enough to hold them. Because not everything you say builds closeness, but everything you hold back with intention builds power. And that power is what makes you unforgettable.